Okay, so picture this. You're not in some quiet, peaceful ashram. No, you're on a battlefield. Kurukshetra. There are these two massive armies just poised, ready to clash.
Yeah, and that's where the Bhagavad Gita actually begins. It's
Mm.
quite dramatic, not the sort of serene setting you might expect for a spiritual text. It unfolds right in those tense moments before this huge war kicks off.
It's amazing. And what's really striking, like you said, is it doesn't just launch into philosophy. Chapter 1 really grounds you in the immediate situation.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
We're dropped right into a conversation. But interestingly, it's not Arjuna and Krishna right away.
Right. We start with King Dhritarashtra. He's blind. He's back in his palace, miles away in Hastinapur.
And he's desperate, absolutely desperate to know what's going on out there on the battlefield.
So how does he find out? Who's giving him the play-by-play?
That would be Sanjay. Now, Sanjay was a disciple of the great sage Vedvyas. And Vedvyas actually gave him this incredible gift, a kind of mystical power, distant vision. He could literally see and hear everything happening on the battlefield from afar.
Wow. So Dhritarashtra, sitting there blind in his palace, is getting a live first-hand report from Sanjay, like having a psychic war correspondent right there.
Exactly. A first-hand account from afar. It's a fascinating setup.
And that's really where we're starting this deep dive, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Our mission today is to unpack that opening dynamic. What insights does this first chapter give us? It really lays the foundation for everything that follows in the Gita.
Okay, let's dig into Dhritarashtra himself then. The sources paint him as, well, complex. He seems to know dharma, what's right, his duty, but he's just completely dominated by his love for his son, Duryodhana.
That attachment is key. And there's this underlying resentment, too, isn't there? Remember, the kingdom went to his younger brother, Pandu, not him.
Ah, right, because Dhritarashtra was born blind.
Exactly. And that fostered this lifelong grudge, this feeling that destiny, dealt him a bad hand.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How often do we struggle with accepting things we just can't change? The family we get, our abilities or lack thereof, just life's circumstances.
Yeah, it's like you get dealt certain cards, and the question is, do you play them? Or do you spend your energy wishing you had a different hand entirely?
Dhritarashtra seems stuck wishing for that different hand.
His struggle really highlights that. It's this inability to accept what is. He's so focused on what he thinks should have been that it blinds him metaphorically this time to the present reality.
Shows how powerful attachment can be even when you know better. It just clouds everything.
Absolutely. It paves the way for disaster, really.
So let's zoom out a bit. This war didn't come out of nowhere. There's a whole backstory, massive family tensions.
Oh, absolutely. You have Dhritarashtra's 100 sons, the Kauravas, led by the eldest, Duryodhana,
And on the other side?
the 5 sons of Pandu, the Pandavas. And importantly, the Pandavas had the just claim to the kingdom.
But they weren't exactly rushing into war, were they?
No, sources say they had to be encouraged, actually, by figures like Krishna and their mother Kunti, reminded of their duty to fight against the Kauravas' injustice.
It's fascinating how both sides actually tried to get Krishna's help before the war.
Mm-hmm. And Krishna's response was brilliant, quite playful in a way. He offered a choice. His massive army, the Narayani Sena, or just himself, alone and unarmed.
And Duryodhana, predictably perhaps, snapped up the army.
He went for the obvious power, yes. But Arjuna chose Krishna.
Just Krishna, not as a warrior, but as his charioteer.
Exactly. For Arjuna, it wasn't about the numbers. It was about having Krishna's wisdom, his divine guidance, to make sure they fought for dharma, for virtue.
Which brings us right to that pivotal moment just before the Gita dialogue really starts. Arjuna wants a better look.
Yes. He asks Krishna, his charioteer now, to drive the chariot right into the middle of the battlefield, between the two armies.
To see who he's actually facing. A moment of reckoning, almost.
Precisely. But this physical battlefield, Kurukshetra, the sources we looked at suggest it's also a metaphor, right?
Yeah, there are deeper interpretations. Paramahansa Yogananda, for instance, has this really interesting take.
He does. He talks about life itself being a constant series of battles, not just physical war, but biological battles for health.
Sociological ones in society.
Psychological battles within our own minds. Even metaphysical and ethical struggles. It's constant.
It's quite a perspective. He even mentions the first conscious battle of the baby soul, that pull between wanting to play and needing to learn or do chores.
Mm-hmm. It starts early. The idea is that the most important war is the internal one.
And as we grow up, those internal battles get more complex, fighting our own bad habits, dealing with negative influences.
Right. And Yogananda points out that we're often psychologically unprepared for these inner fights. like nations caught off guard by war, but on a personal level.
So we need this kind of inner readiness to fight the rebels of bad habits, as he calls them.
Exactly. And that's where daily self-reflection comes in, according to this interpretation of the Gita, like taking stock each day. Asking yourself, in my inner psychological battles today, for health, for self-control, for knowledge, did wisdom win or did ignorance? Did discrimination beat error or the other way around?
He uses some powerful analogies like financial greed tempting our moral reason.
Yeah, that battle between divine discrimination and false reasoning, whispering sweet nothings about quick gains. We face those kinds of choices all the time, big and small.
He even applies it to food. The battle with food greed. That hits home for a lot of people, I imagine.
Definitely. Those little indulgences seem harmless, but they can add up, impacting health. It's a daily skirmish against the armies of memories of uncontrolled eating.
It's about conscious choices then, even with what we eat.
And it extends to our relationships, too. He talks about wicked associates and how honest criticism, even if it stings, is way more valuable than empty flattery.
That story about the saint mourning his critical friend.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Flattery makes us comfortable, but criticism helps us grow.
So the overarching idea is this constant internal battle between wisdom and delusion.
Yes, playing out right inside us. Yogananda uses this metaphor of the body as a kingdom. It can be ruled by the prince soul,
Representing our higher nature, wisdom, discrimination.
or it can be usurped by the rebel king ego.
The ego, with its allies like uncontrolled senses and negative thoughts.
Exactly. And these two potential rulers create vastly different inner landscapes. Soul rule means harmony, health, efficiency.
While ego rule leads to ignorance, sickness, failure, he uses these abstract figures X and Y to illustrate the contrast.
The consequences are stark. Soul rule brings peace, wisdom, abundance. Ego rule brings disease, inner chaos, eventually a kind of spiritual death.
This internal conflict also ties into karma, doesn't it? The momentum of our past actions and habits.
Very much so. Yogananda calls it the battle between prenatal and postnatal karma.
Prenatal, like from before this life.
Yes, tendencies carried over, heredity, ingrained patterns. And postnatal is everything from this life environment, choices, developing habits. Our actions are this mix of free choice, past conditioning, and present influences.
It's kind of humbling realizing how much we're driven by past habits, not always pure free will.
Most people are, according to this view. It often takes some kind of pain or suffering to make us stop and question why we act the way we do, what's really influencing us.
So prenatal karma could show up as our natural inclinations, maybe even affecting our career choices.
Potentially, yes. And Yogananda suggests things like spiritual analysis, maybe intuitive astrology or guidance from a guru, can help us understand these deep-seated tendencies.
Why? What's the point of understanding them?
So we can choose consciously, so we can act from wisdom and free will rather than just being pushed around by old negative habits.
To break free from those patterns.
Exactly. The goal is freedom, guided by wisdom. But that battlefield of life is internal, filled with these warriors, good and bad tendencies deeply entrenched within us.
Wow, and it gets even more granular, right? Down to the physical body.
He touches on the chemical warfare, our white blood cells constantly fighting bacteria, a reminder of how healthy living supports our internal defenses.
And then there's the more subtle stuff, the astral sounds in meditation.
Yes, that's quite fascinating. These subtle sounds like bees, a flute, bells, the ocean heard in deep meditation, corresponding to different energy centers or chakras in the spine and brain.
Like an inner vibrational landscape?
Sort of. Each sound relates to a different center, coccygeal, sacral, lumbar, and so on, up to the medulla. Meditation, in this context, is about withdrawing energy from the outer senses.
Pulling back from the noise of the world.
And tuning into these inner sounds, these centers of consciousness. It's an inward journey.
Right.
Away from the material focus towards what he calls Christ consciousness, that universal awareness within.
But getting there, the meditation itself can be a struggle, another battlefield.
Absolutely, a psychological battle. Because our ingrained habits, what he calls king material desire and all those negative tendencies, they fight back. They resist the effort to cultivate discrimination and self-control.
That anecdote you mentioned about Mr. J, the recovering alcoholic.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it? Even with strong resolve, those deep-seated habits can surge back powerfully. It takes time, real consistent effort to replace bad habits with good ones.
And avoiding triggers is crucial. Environments, even just thoughts.
Definitely. Meditation can actually stir these things up, bring both good and bad habits out of the subconscious, out of the slumber of indifference, as he puts it.
Leading to an internal clash for dominance.
Yes. And there can be a real reluctance, you know.
Mm.
A part of us doesn't want to give up familiar sense pleasures, even if we know they're holding us back spiritually.
We cling to the known, even if it's not ultimately fulfilling.
But the promise, the Gita's promise, according to Yogananda, is that if you persevere in that inner battle, you eventually realize, true, lasting happiness isn't in fleeting sense experiences.
It's found where?
In connecting with the ever-new joy of silence, the peace you find in deep meditation, it's trading temporary kicks for profound, enduring bliss.
And people worry they'll lose something, like lose their ability to enjoy life through the senses.
That fear exists, but the teaching emphasizes that you're not really losing anything worthwhile. You're renouncing inferior, temporary pleasures to gain superior, lasting spiritual joy.
Okay, so wrapping this up, this deep dive into just the first chapter, the main takeaway seems to be that while the Gita starts with a literal war,
It immediately plunges us into the deeper internal wars we all fight.
that struggle between attachment and detachment, wisdom and delusion.
Good habits versus bad habits. Self-control versus indulgence. It's all about the quest for self-mastery.
The real Kurukshetra, the real battlefield, isn't just out there. It's right here, inside us, in our minds, our bodies, our habits.
Exactly. Which brings it right back to you, the listener. Reflect on that. What are the battles you're navigating in your own life right now?
Maybe it's preparing for something big, understanding a complex idea, or just those everyday choices you make.
And here's something to really chew on. In your own internal Kurukshetra, which army feels stronger right now? Is it the forces of wisdom and self-control? Or is it delusion and indulgence that seem to have more ground?
And maybe, just maybe, what's one small step you could take today to consciously engage with that inner conflict? Exploring the next chapters, seeing how Arjuna himself wrestles with all this, might offer some really valuable clues.